You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Welcome to the 21.5 Show, a podcast for professional pilots by professional pilots. Join Dylan and Max, both with experience in flight instruction, the airlines, and business aviation, as they talk to a variety of industry experts, share stories, and have a little fun along the way.
It's just getting harder and harder to produce a top 45 aviation podcast, Max.
Is that in this country or?
I can't.
Were we the number one in Lithuania or something?
I think we were holding that down. Shout out. Yeah, we sat down with our microphones ready to record, and then my wife printed a 97-page document.
Printed a book and then hit record, and it says there's a problem with our equipment, and we had to restart.
It's okay. We're going to battle through adversity.
Is real.
Yeah. We're battling through adversity to bring you
always
the finest podcast for professional pilot by professional pilots, the 21.5 podcast. We had to delay this episode a week because we were both had to go back to school. It's funny that we're both due recurrent in the same week.
Yeah, that's weird. And we get our medicals in the same month, don't we? Or did we get off track?
We used to.
Yeah, we always used to do a men's lunch and medical session, but
that was fun. No, not anymore. I don't think.
How did we get out of sync?
Oh, well, I turned 40 next year, so then I'm going to have to start. Oh, no, I might just do the second class.
That's what I do. I'm a huge second class guy.
Yeah.
Why expose yourself if it's not required?
That's right. Anyways, lots to talk about on the show today.
But when you do get a first class, what should you do?
Laminate it?
Well, you're exposing yourself to more risk of having a problem. So what would...
Oh, I see where we're going with this. You should visit our friends at Advanced Aircrew Academy. No?
No, that's if you don't know a lot not aviation.
Oh, okay. I should visit all these.
Both of our sponsors can help you.
We'll chat more about both of our sponsors here coming up in a little bit. So, yeah, how was your training?
It was a nightmare. 2 years in a row.
Oh, no. Didn't last year, if you go back and listen to the episodes maybe in late August last year, Max went on a pretty good rant.
Yeah, I was so pissed. And so this year, I'll make it short. It wasn't, it was just, they just jerked us around with scheduling and I just don't have a lot of patience in training, it turns out. But they call me, they're like, oh, your instructor had a dental problem. You're going to start at noon. This is on Sunday. So noon on Monday. I said, okay, yeah, no problem. We'll stay late. No big deal. So then at about 10:30, I'm in my hotel room. We get a call. They're going to cancel today. I'm like, what? I'm like, dude, what? And so we went down this whole path and they reschedule and then they call and they're like, oh, do you want to come back next week? And I'm like, no, dude, we are finishing this on Friday. I've already stayed an extra day. We are done.
Would you like
Figure
to come
it out?
Would you like to come back next week?
Yeah, I was about to kill somebody. I was so pissed. So,
oh my God.
It's just funny because then all of a sudden you start blowing people up and the training manager's gone. And so there's some guy filling in. And then I called the instructor. I'm like, can you just show up in the morning, call these guys and just get us done with this nightmare? Yeah. So
be done with it.
We got done.
Power move. What some do with finesse, Max does with power.
That's good. That's actually good. I wonder how many people got that joke.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, our training was good, but I can tell that the centers are short-staffed. I mean, that's really the whole problem.
Well,
right
the
now,
only
right?
thing I can say in their defense is this is a brand new sim, and they just started this program.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
They don't have a lot of people, so they don't have a lot of margin for error.
Exactly.
Because they don't have a lot of people trained up already.
Yeah, and I think that's the same. I think there's a few guys in our program, in the Challenger program, same thing. The guys retired, or
Well, what the worst part? What's happening in Dallas specifically? Because you have flight safety and CAE, right? Big training centers there. And I know at Southwest specifically, when they offered the early retirement stuff, a lot of people in the training department retired. And so that's why there's such a backlog of trying to get people back online, and they're short-staffed on the line because the bottleneck is in training. Because they don't have enough people to be able to train people on leave and everything else and new hires and all of that to get things spooled up. So they went out to the market and hired a bunch of instructors away from these business jet training centers.
In Dallas. Interesting.
In Dallas specifically. And the biggest problem for these guys at a 142 training center is getting people trained and turned into forever. TCEs and all that. So the FAA is their bottleneck. So they can't get anybody online. So as usual, Aviation.
It's funny. What do you think about, like, it just seems like more and more of the training is just happening in Dallas now. I mean, obviously with business aviation, but then you got American and Southwest are both training there, right? And so you've just got a ton of training, and then they just seems like they're putting more and more sims in there. And I wonder, is that a good thing to just centralize all that stuff?
Well, it is good from a geographic standpoint because it's in the middle and it's easy to get to for everybody. I also do have an update to the destination guide from Dallas. Remember, I was a big Marriott Airport North advocate, and I went there and I actually switched hotels in the middle because one of my friends turned me on to this other hotel, the Westin in Las Colinas, by the convention center.
This episode brought to you by our friends at Marriott Bonvoy.
Yeah, that place is awesome. It's new. It's super nice. It was cheap still, like $100 and something bucks. And the best part is you can walk to a whole bunch of restaurants and bars and all kinds of stuff that's like right there.
Okay. Good update. All right. Training was a success. I had...
Yeah, how was your training?
It was good. Actually, it was great. Is it because we're doing the online recurrent like we did last year? So it's 2 days longer because you sit at home and do the recurrent.
So stupid. How does it get longer?
Because you do the ground school the 2 days, and then you just do a sim when you're there. So normally, the way ours is structured is you do half day ground school and then a sim, half day ground school sim. So it's.
So do you still go to Tucson for the same amount of days?
Yes,
that's my question.
Yeah, the footprint is the same.
So what is the point?
The point is that it's a much more gentlemanly schedule when you're there. So if you're going, I would only recommend this if you're at a place where you go to training that there's lots of other stuff to do. And it's like, like if you were going somewhere where there's family or like, we're in.
Wait, is it an option?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's totally optional.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, like, for us, it's great because we stay at this cool place with a good pool and a golf course and like stuff. So, it's
it's
nice
kind of the same thing too. As I think you've experienced, a lot of the instructors are slide readers. Yeah, the good ones. I've noticed the difference between a good ground school instructor and a crummy one is the good ones click the slides at the end of their lecture.
Yeah.
The other ones, if there's someone's just going to read me the slide, I may as well stay home and read them myself, right?
We had an excellent instructor, and it was for recurrence. It's tough. A recurrent is tough because some people really know the air. They've been in the airplane 20 years, and other people, it's their first one.
Well, the online thing too, I think is better if you've already been through a few live recurrents.
So, anyways, I like it. I know it's not any shorter, but it's cool. I play golf and have a good time. So it was nice.
What does your wife think about that? Which one does she prefer?
She does not download or subscribe to this. We would be a top 44 podcast if she listened. So I think we're safe. So let's see. We had a request. Several listeners have requested a PSA because we haven't done one of those in a while. So I'm going to find the right button here. And are you a pilot on social media? Did you see there was another aviation crash recently? Please restrain from calling names of the pilots and making accusations. Have you learned anything over the past month?
I think he has.
I hope so.
I saw something. You didn't he say make some post that was a lot more tactful?
Yeah, I think so. Be respectful.
But does he ever learn his lesson?
I don't know.
Usually not.
Yeah. Yeah. Sad news if you didn't see, just right before we pushed record here, that looks like an XLS crashed up in Connecticut and 4 people perished. No real other details that we've seen so far. But again, it goes back to the discussion we had. What is useful to discuss right away? And talk about and even speculate, and what things should we just put on the table to wait for the investigation. So we got a lot more comments about that actually in the mailbag here in just a second. So yeah, speaking of training, did you guys in the XLS, you don't do international school at all, do you? I haven't done international school in a long time. I would say I'm pretty much
Because you haven't flown international in a long
Because
time.
I haven't flown international in a long time. I can't even imagine, like, if you're like, all right, we're flying international and we need to do all the international procedures training and all that. I would really struggle from like, okay, I get you can go to school, but then like, okay, the ops or not the ops specs, but the LOAs and everything you would need. Like, I would have to dive into that for a little bit to figure out what was currently needed. And if I did a crossing and all that kind of stuff, like the equipment, I'd need to brush up on a lot of that. Fortunately, our buddies over at Advanced Aircrew Academy just made a blog post about a lot of that stuff. It was titled "International Procedures Training Clear as Mud. We've Got the Filter." And it was actually
That about sums it up. That's perfect. Yeah, that blog, if you guys don't subscribe to that, check that out. They post some really good stuff on that.
Yeah, they did a good job, especially of like if you are running a flight department and then you know, like a department manager, and then you're 135 versus 91. Obviously, you're going to have different requirements, but then like they like give you ideas about the courseware topics that you need to take every year, and you know, and just it's a good place to start your program at least, and figure out what's required and what you got to cover, because it would be overwhelming just if you just sat down with the books. Ignorance is bliss. I think that's really my my motto. But you can find their blog at aircrewacademy.com/blog. And thanks to Advanced Aircrew Academy, a proud sponsor of, well, I think they're proud. They're a sponsor. Yeah. It's questionable if they're proud of this or not. Okay. No reviews today. No donations today, but lots of mail. Are you ready for the first one? Yeah, I'm going to read it to you because I don't think you've seen this, and then we're going to record it. So Chris sent us an email. He said, "Here's your answers on the they ain't 20s, but I keep them clean" reference.
That was fun because I was laughing. I'm like, I don't even know what that means,
Yeah.
but I watched that, the link to Friday.
So I'll play this right now.
You like that, huh?
Yeah, I do.
Got them 20s on there. Them 20s, I just got them.
Them ain't 20s, but it's off the hook.
Them are 20s, man. They 10s. I bought them from somebody, but they nice, though.
Yeah, they cool.
Or he doesn't say that keeps them clean.
No, I know. I don't know. I don't know, but that's what he says. Sorry.
This is no more clear.
Well, it's the 20s and 10s. That part's in there. That's from the movie Next Friday. So thanks, Chris, for setting us straight on that. Kind of want to go. I haven't seen that movie in a long time. All right, here.
I can't wait to talk to Donovan and ask him about
we're
this.
going to check in with him in a little bit. All right, next email. You can read that.
Just an opinion on the fallout of the crash. Maybe you address it in the next podcast. I think healthy critical discussion is important amongst peers. Social media can be a great tool for this. However, essentially anything we post is public access, even with a closed group. That means our discussions need to occur in a way that is professional. If we choose to engage in a discussion of an accident, when we post on social media as professionals, we need to word our posts in a way that reflects good on the industry as a whole. Anything we post can be in the next newspaper story as it becomes easy to access to the public. Just imagine the news article based on popular social media personalities' posts. A member of the online community dedicated to professional aviators considers these pilots to be murderers. It's something that is damning to the industry as a whole if it ended up in a public article somewhere, not just to this crew. Even in a closed group, all it takes is one annoyed member to screenshot the post and let it get out. Just some food for thought. Peter. Yeah, I hadn't even considered that, really.
Yeah.
Had you?
Not until I read this email.
The way the media is these days.
I mean, I know there's definitely been some like reporters and stuff that have tried to get into some other pilot groups I've been into. So,
Really?
yeah, they have like
How do you know?
because I've seen the people post the requests. You don't know anything about Facebook, but you have to request.
No, I do.
Okay, you request to
Don't
join
treat
a
me
group.
like an idiot.
Okay, well, that was a compliment. I would be complimented if someone was like, "I know you know nothing about social media." God, good. But yeah, then they'll post. I've seen them. They'll post like, "Look who's like requesting to get into this group." Like, just be careful. So, speaking of social media, we got a lot of comments from LinkedIn regarding the visual approach discussion there. Vince said, "I welcome visual approaches. I'm seeing pilots with weak fundamental flying skills stay as far away as possible from visual approaches." And then Jim says, pilots think a visual approach is different in a jet than in a piston single, and they think they need to be seeing something different. but they aren't sure what, when really it's the same.
It's I've always said one of my catchphrases, like when I was a instructor and stuff, people get so worked up about it. An airplane is an airplane. At the end of the day, they have little differences, but it's still just an airplane. Just
right. Okay.
I don't think that only works for some people.
We had a good conversation with Eddie K. He said, I agree visual approach skills can deteriorate and should be maintained. However, the added risk of accepting a visual approach should always be considered and compared with what could be gained. And then I replied asking him what he thought about having a documented policy for taking a visual approach. And he said, I believe a policy is appropriate and should have SOPs for TAWs, TCAS, and NAV modes. Day, night should also be a consideration. Very little to be gained by visual approaches at night.
I suppose that's very airport dependent too. What if you fly into a small uncontrolled field all the time and you have to execute the entire procedure, or call it airport site and land in Nebraska where there's no terrain?
But what do you think about the point of, like, you probably should have something on paper about visual approaches? I guess if you're the larger the department, obviously, probably the more the need.
I think that's a scale thing. I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that. I'm not sure that's appropriate, like in our 2-pilot, 1 airplane operations where you fly with the same person all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe
some. I mean, and maybe not super specific, but maybe there is some, hey, or even maybe a list of airports. Like, we're not going to do a visual approach at night to these airports or something. I don't know.
Certainly warrants discussion.
Yeah. Let's see. James wrote in also. He says, I think as a professional aviators, it's inherently important to keep the skills sharp. That being said, it also makes sense to back up the visual with the box or a nav aid. Bet the guys who accidentally landed on the wrong airport while on a visual wish they had taken that extra step.
Or at least the non-flying pilot.
That's what you said in the last episode. I think that
Did I?
Yeah. Non-flying pilot back it up, and then the flying pilot shut off the flight director and just make the magic happen. I'll let you read this next because I don't even know if you know this yet. This is brand new. And this is from our boy Jason.
Yeah, I did see this somewhere.
Okay.
Heading to Aspen's anytime soon? Be sure to check FDC notice for amended approach minima effective 18 August of 21. The localizer/DME Echo and RNAV GPS Foxtrot minima have been raised to meet the new TERPS criteria. This criteria increased the Category C circling radius from 1.7 to 3.5 miles, resulting in a new controlling obstacle and increase of 740 feet to the Cat C MDA. This yields a Cat C minimum of 10,960 feet MSL, or 3,122 feet height above airport, a significant increase over the previous minimums. Review the associated NOTAMs carefully and be sure to apply the correct approach minima the next time you fly into Aspen using one of the public non-special authorization approaches. Jason Herman from episode 15. How's your Aspen?
It's a lot higher. Wow. So
just what you need is increasing the minimum.
So look, I mean, so if you tuned out there for a second, here's the headline. For a lot of airplanes going in there, the minimum just went up 740 feet. That's pretty significant. So, yeah, if you want to learn more about Aspen, we had a discussion at length with Jason Herman in episode 15, where we covered everything from
Jason Herman, the Messiah of aviation.
All right, last thing to check in on social media. We're going to see what our boy Donovan Batiste has been up to lately.
Please.
Yeah, I know.
I'm anxiously awaiting this.
Still have not successfully raised him via.
Have you attempted to, though?
Yeah, I sent him messages.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. So we need our listeners to help us and reach out to him and continue to ask him to come on our show. And he's like a motivational speaker, so I think it'd just be an incredible motivational speech for him to just, oh yeah, this is it. You ready?
I'd like to see the video of him after his first solo.
Incredible.
If you think he's fired up now.
This one is entitled How to Land an Airplane.
What up, Joe? We coming down, man. We flapped out up in this thing. Letting that thing float across the runway, you know what I'm talking about? Center line maintain. Hug the center line like you hug your woman, man. Nice and tight. Right rudder. Line that thing up. So you land the whole nose straight on this runway. Boom, there it is. Protect that nose. Glide across the runway. Just glide like you got socks on, gliding across the kitchen floor. Hey.
We all flapped out on this thing. That's probably my favorite line right there.
Wait, didn't you say when you were in training you were making some call-outs?
Yeah. We were doing a takeoff, and we had this older gentleman who was our sim instructor, and I was getting bored. And so we're like, it's like, do our calls, set thrust. He goes, thrust set. I said, look at them instruments, foliage, they're all in the green. The guy's like, what did you just say? And he sticks his head between the seats.
Full call out. We're gonna have an episode on call outs with him. I think would be just incredible. At least people would remember and pay attention and make more call outs. It'd be good.
Oh my God.
It'd be
Maybe
good for
we
the
can
industry.
write like like an ops manual, call out sheet.
That would be incredible.
That would be, Roy could do that.
Yeah.
That
sounds like a good Roy project. All right. Well, thanks to everyone who wrote into the mailbag. It's info@215podcast.com if you want to shoot us an email with your thoughts on the episode or anything else aviation related. Socials is at 215podcast. And we haven't had any flight advice in a while, Max. So if you've got any airmen seeking advice, you can go on our website, 215podcast.com, and we've got the anonymous form you can fill out if you're seeking the wisdom from either the power or the finesse side of the microphone. Coming up, we've had a lot of listeners request to hear from pilots that do interesting jobs. And you succeeded in finding someone.
Hit the head on the nail.
But first, we'd like to thank our friends over at Harvey Watt. You mentioned them a little earlier, Max. First class, second class, third class. It doesn't matter what medical you got. You got to protect it. And the best way that we know how to do that is to get loss of license coverage from Harvey Watt.
And the other thing, too, now that you're approaching the ripe age of 40, is you could utilize their free to people that have policies to them advisory service and say, hey, what is my exposure change going at age 40 between a first class and second class medical? Like, how much, what else are they looking at? Obviously you get an EKG, but what else? Right? So
yeah. For I remember when I got that first EKG at 35, I was kind of freaked out. Not for any particular reason, just like, what if there was something weird, and there's just more scrutiny the older we get.
Exactly.
We're one of the, what did that guy say? We're one of the last 6 Gen Xers from Embry-Riddle.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. We're all getting older. So protect that little piece of paper in your wallet with the coverage from Harvey Watt, harveywatt.com. And here's our interview with Ken.
All right, Dylan, we got a very special guest today. A friend of mine named Ken Minus. I met him on... you sent me a screenshot, actually. He made a post on some Facebook group with his moose, and so I connected with him, and we've kind of been texting back and forth, following each other's... His is done. And
you're talking about an airplane, right? Not an
not
animal.
a pet moose, no. And so he's been making some changes to his, and I've been finishing mine up. We've been sending pictures and stuff, and it came to find out Ken does some pretty interesting things in aviation as a professional pilot. So we get a lot of requests, as you know, from our listeners for professional pilots that are doing interesting jobs, and Ken certainly fits the bill. So welcome to the show, Ken.
All right. Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
So Ken, I guess, why don't we kind of start off with your aviation bio, how you got started and how you ended up kind of where you are.
Okay. Well, I was interested in airplanes since I was a kid, but never had the opportunity to fly till I got out of college. Had a couple of jobs I didn't like in sales, and decided, hey, I'm going to give this flying thing a try, and just fell in love with it right from the get-go. And originally wanted to be an airline pilot, but in those days they weren't doing much hiring. I was already married and had 2 kids and couldn't afford to eat dirt and be a CFI and do the commuter, the commuter pilot thing for a while, like 10 years before you could get to a majors in those days. And so I had bought a V-tail, 1947 V-tail Bonanza from a crop duster, and I was flying that thing around to build my time. And I got interested in, in what he was doing. And I thought, it's a better fit for me. It's good money from the get-go. It's a little more exciting. And I could be home every night, with my family and my kids. So that was important to me. And as it turned out, I finally got really serious about it. I called him up one night and said, hey, man, I'm going to be a crop duster. And he's like, no, you don't want to do this. He tried to talk me out of it. So, but when he found out I was really determined, he was like, well, you know what? We didn't like the pilot we had last year. He wasn't doing a good job for us. And if you'll buy your own airplane so that you've got all the liability and risk, we'll give you a shot. So I did, and I went off to crop dusting school. Got just enough hours to get my commercial rating. I had 251 hours when I did my first spray job. So, I mean, the ink was barely dry in my commercial license, which is hard to do these days.
Yeah.
And anyway, I started crop dusting and fell in love with it, and managed to hit a couple power lines that first year.
Did you really?
I was kind of school of hard knocks, you know. But I had a good teacher. He kept me out of trouble for the most part. So one of the questions I get asked a lot is, so what's it like to hit a power line? Isn't that scary? And, you know, I don't know if an ag pilot hasn't hit one. And, yeah, it isn't scary, because the reason you hit it is because you didn't see it. And so you go through it so fast because you're traveling 250 feet a second that it's over before you ever have time to get scared, and then you're just pissed off. And taking inventory and trying to figure out what's still left on the airplane and if you got any damage. And
do you feel like when you're flying and you hit it, does it feel like you hit something solid, or does it just feel like a tug, or what does it feel like?
Yeah, you get a little jolt, and you know, hopefully you hit it with the prop. The prop will cut right through them usually. We also have cutters on the landing gear,
just like a helicopter. Those same kind of cutters that are on a helicopter that are made to cut power lines?
Yeah, on the leading edge of the landing gear is a sharp blade.
Oh, okay.
So that if you catch it with landing gear, hopefully it'll cut it. I found out one year that it doesn't cut copper wire very well. I was in a Cessna Ag Husky, and I was spraying this field next to this lady's house. And I went through there, and unbeknownst to me was a copper ladder line, which is a TV antenna wire, and it's unshielded, and it's separated by a little piece of wood. And that it was going from her house across the field I was working and up into the trees and half a mile to the top of the hill. And they had an antenna way up there on top of the hill so they could get TV service. And I'm flying through there, and I grabbed that with the landing gear. Well, copper just stretches. So the airplane's slowing down. I'm adding power. I'm at full power. And finally that copper wire broke. And when it broke, it wrapped itself around the landing gear so tight that I had to use a cutting wheel to get it off. I couldn't even unwind it. And so I called Mrs. Hatley up, and I said, Mrs. Hatley, I said, you know, I was flying that field next to your house, and I think I hit something. And she says, well, you know, I wondered what happened. I heard you go by, and I was sitting in my living room watching TV, and all of a sudden the television set just slammed up against the wall. The wire was connected directly to her TV.
No way.
So, anyway.
Did you ask her if she thought that might be pertinent information to give you before you started spraying that field?
Yeah, well, you know, it's such a small wire, I never could see it. You know, I didn't have a chance, but fortunately, it'd been a lot better if I'd hit it with the prop.
What happens if you hit it with the tail?
I don't know that that's ever been done. The landing gear's hanging way down below the tail. One interesting thing I had happen on one power line, and this was about 10 years ago. I was flying and working a field, and I'd actually pulled up over this power line a couple of times already, but it angled across the field in the corner at a really strange angle. And I was actually listening to a podcast, come to think of it, and it was a preacher. And he was asking us about what's the best sermon you ever heard. And I'm thinking about that in my mind. You talk about distractions. I pulled up over that power line, made my turn, came back down, and flew right through it.
Oh, man. Jeez.
So anyway, but when I hit that one, I hit it with the prop, and it was a small two-phase wire. And again, it's usually the small ones you hit because they're the hardest to see. And that one took and swept off all the VGs off of one wing, off my left wing. And I'm flying back, and I'm looking, you know, and I'm missing a couple of spray nozzles. And I'm like, man, why am I having to hold half aileron to keep this airplane flying straight and level? And I thought I'd bent something. And then it dawned on me that it was because I was missing all the VGs off of one wing. So in the STC, when you buy an STC kit for VGs and they say, hey, you shouldn't fly this airplane if you're missing more than 3 or 4 VGs off of a wing, that's exactly why. Because it really does make the wing produce more lift.
So let's back up for a second. So there's an actual crop dusting school that you attend? Is that still?
There is, yeah. There's a couple of them across the country. And it's hard to get into this business without going to one. The insurance companies like to see it. The largest obstacle to becoming a crop duster is getting enough experience to be qualified to get insurance. For obvious reasons.
Right. So at the school, you've got to have your commercial or you got to have some licenses at least when you show up. In these schools, typically, I mean, are you actually applicating, or is this more like ground school type stuff, or can you talk a little bit about
both.
What actually happens?
It's both. So the time that you get at the school can go towards your commercial rating. You do ground school. Some schools will start you out in a Super Cub with an instructor in the back, and you get the basics of working a field and how to look for the obstacles and how to set up a field. And then they'll put you in the airplane by yourself, and the instructor will be on the ground with a radio and talking to you on the radio and coaching you that way.
And is this like months and months, or like a weekend, or how long is a school like that?
It took me about 5 weeks to get through the school. It took my son, he went through a modified program because he had some experience already, and we wanted to get him turbine qualified. So he was back there for like, I think 3 or 4 weeks.
Did you ever know there was a school?
No.
You shouldn't go to school unless you've got a company that's going to sponsor you or something. Is that kind of how it works now? Or do you see guys with low time go to school first? Can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, there's guys that'll spend the money and go to school first and then look for a job after. Like all other areas of aviation right now, there's a shortage of ag pilots, and they're having a hard time getting young guys plugged in. Our biggest challenge right now is the fact that most ag birds are turbines now. So, in the old days, you could throw somebody in an old Cessna or an old radio engine ag cat, and the insurance company would say, okay, well, I'll try to get insurance on a guy, a young pilot in a $500,000 or $1 million turbine spray plane. They don't want to insure that guy. So that's been a real challenge for us to get young guys involved in this industry. But we definitely need more pilots.
So what is the entry level ag pilot pay? I just have no idea.
So the farmers, everything, in aviation is by the tack hour. However, in agriculture, everything's by the acre. So we charge by the acre to the farmer, and the ag pilot gets a percentage of that. So let's just say, rough numbers, it's getting close to $10 an acre now on average. And the pilots usually get about 20% of that, so it's $2 an acre.
And does that include what you're applying to the field, or does the farmer pay for that separately?
Yeah, that would be a separate charge, and the farmers pay for that. And usually they'll supply the chemical through a chemical company. Some crop dusting businesses also sell chemical and do the flying.
So how many acres can you cover in a day?
Well, a 500-gallon turbine airplane will do about 160 acres an hour. So a pilot can make about $320 an hour.
So how many acres will 500 gallons cover?
That all depends on what application rate we're doing. So some products are applied at only 1 to 2 gallons per acre, and other products have to go on at 10 gallons per acre. So
interesting.
You could have a significant load. My son went back and sprayed corn in Iowa this year in a boom setup that was electrostatic booms, which is really kind of a fascinating technology, where the spray actually goes through a highly charged 18,000 volt lead and becomes positively charged, and the spray droplets are attracted to the negative in the ground. And so it comes out of the airplane and just goes right down to the ground. And they're able to do those applications at 1 gallon to the acre. So he was hauling 350, 400 acre loads. I mean, he could haul more product and more acres than he had fuel to go out and spray in one load.
Huh. Wow. So, and then are you guys normally operating out of a private airstrip, or do you go around and use public airplanes, or where do you
land on the farm?
Where do you land it?
Well, it's both. It's both. There's a lot of guys that run out of public airstrips, and there's a lot of guys that have their own airstrips. There's, I run off of a farmer's airstrip. He owns it, and I lease it from him. So.
And you have fuel there, obviously, and everything?
Yeah, it's not much fun for us to run off of a controlled airport. It really cuts into our productivity. So it's always nicer if you're on a private airstrip. You can get more work done.
Makes sense. Can you talk a little bit about the typical business structure? So let's say I'm a young guy, I go through the school maybe. Do you start your own company? Is that typically, or does each crop dusting pilot kind of do their own thing, or are there big companies that you work for, or how does that normally look?
Well, it just depends. It's hard to start your own. I was actually in business for myself the first year, but I was subcontracting to a crop dusting guy, in his business. The second year I was out on my own completely, but still flying for that guy some too. But most of the time you start out as a loader inside of somebody's business, and you learn it from the ground up. So you learn the chemicals, the crops, how to mix the chemicals. And because at the end of the day, our business really isn't about the flying, even though it is for us as pilots, but it's really all about the application. It's about doing a safe and accurate application for the grower. Because if you don't do that, he's not going to come back and use you again. He's not hiring you to put on an air show. He's hiring you to get the chemical in the right spot at the right time and in a timely fashion and accurately.
And that comes down to the skill of the pilot, right? On a large part. And then is there some technology that's involved with, so you're not overlapping more than you should, or how does that work?
Yeah, there's a ton of technology. I mean, when we first started, we were dropping flags, paper flags. And before that, they were actually putting guys in the field with big, tall poles and flags, and you would just line up with those guys. And after you made your pass, they would walk over 60 or 70 feet, and you'd come back for another pass. But now, since about 1996 is when I bought my first GPS. It was kind of in the mid-90s when GPS became really popular for our business. It's made us way more accurate, and also we have flow control on the airplane now. So that takes into account our changes in airspeed and ground speed and changes the flow coming out of the airplane so that we have exactly 5 gallons per acre coming out of the airplane no matter what our ground speed is. So it will make adjustments constantly while we're spraying.
So with GPS, do you actually have do you make little tracks you follow, like a grid or something on the field?
Yeah, we have a GPS screen and a light bar. The light bar is out in front of the hopper so that it's in your line of view. You're not having to look down on the cockpit, because obviously that's a bad idea going across the field. So your attention's always outside until you get up in the turn. And up in the turn is when we'll look down and check our engine instruments and that type of thing. But the light bar, we just follow that, just keep the light centered. And light bars give you a lot of information. It can tell you what your gallons per acre is coming out of the airplane. It can tell you your ground speed, it can tell you your cross track, how many feet off you are. You might be 4 or 5 feet off. We have to maintain typically less than 15 feet if you don't want any skips, and preferably under 10 feet as far as our accuracy. So you're flying, I always tell people, you're flying an extremely accurate ILS all day long, 10 feet off the ground at 160 miles an hour. That's what we do.
Wow. You got to be exhausted at the end of that. How many hours a day will you fly?
It's mentally exhausting, yeah. Well, in the summer, in June, by us, it's light by 5 a.m. So we try to be in the air at 5 a.m. Doesn't get dark till 9 o'clock at night. So there's days where we go from 5 to 9.
Wow. So can you walk us through like a normal, quote unquote, normal day as the pilot? I know there's a lot of moving parts with the chemical and the loading and all that kind of stuff, but what does a normal day look like?
Well, in the morning or the night before, we'll go over the game plan for the day. And of course that could change due to winds, our biggest challenge. And we've typically got to spray at 10 mile an hour or less. So we lay out all the fields. We'll actually upload the fields into the computer in the airplane. So you'll have geo-reference maps right on the screen, and the GPS will guide you right to that field. And then you'll see an outline of the field, of course, on the screen, and you just got to go fill that in. So that's kind of the morning planning. we jump in. We have loaders that mix chemicals for us and fuel the airplane. We hot fuel because the cycle counts, right? We don't have to shut that thing off in every load. And we might be back in, depending on what we're spraying. On average, we're back into the pit and grabbing another load every 30 to 40 minutes. On dry fertilizer, that could be every 8 to 10 minutes. On liquid, on big loads, it might be an hour. But I'd say on overall average, it's 30 to 40 minutes for the whole season.
And then how many?
So you get lots of takeoffs and landings. You get lots of practice.
It's good.
And how long? What's your fuel limit? Do you shut down the fuel or do you hot fuel?
Yeah, we got a hot fuel. Most aircraft now have a bottom load fueling system, which makes it a little safer for the loaders versus trying to load over the top of the wing. And we don't want to take on any more fuel weight than we need because, of course, it's going to affect the performance of the aircraft. So a lot of times we don't carry more than about 2 hours of fuel. And we're packing, on a 500-gallon airplane, we're packing about 4,000-pound loads in the hopper.
Wow. And then if you do identify, like you get hired to do a specific field, you specialize in a single area? Like, so is there one home base that you have, or will you travel a fair amount to get to a specific farm and then have to try and set up a mobile base?
Yeah, no. So like our operation, we have 2 airstrips we work out of. And, the closer you are to your airstrip, the more productive you're going to be. So I don't personally like to ferry further than about 18 miles. But you get in the Midwest where they're hauling those great big loads because they're doing 1 to 2 gallon work on the corn. Some of those guys will ferry out to 50 miles to service a field. So, these aircraft are really amazing, the amount of work and abuse we put them through. They really are a flying tank. They're just really stout, really well built. And, we sit behind the wing, we sit behind the hopper. You've got the engine out in front of you. It's about 18 feet from the cockpit to the nose. And so you've got a lot of protection if you do get in an accident. You got a lot of things out in front of you to take that hit. Now, I personally have never wrecked one, which, knock on wood. Where's the wood? I better be knocking on some wood because I'm probably not the average. The average Joe's probably wrecked at least one, but my son wrecked one. So he wrecked one early on in his first year. He had a set of power lines and had something very unique happen. It was a shaft AgCat 1340 round engine, and the power line broke off and got stuck on the back side of the crankshaft right behind the propeller. It was laying across that, and it was stuck in the cabane struts of the AgCat. And as he was ferrying back to the airport, it decided to get sucked in onto the crankshaft, and it wound up in there so tight behind the propeller that the engine just slowly died. And he just didn't have a great spot to land and ended up wrecking the airplane. But he felt bad about it. I told him, I said, I'm kind of glad you wrecked that airplane. I never liked it anyway. Let's go get a better one.
Let's go get a turbine.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Jeez, that's crazy.
He wasn't hurt. That was the main thing, and I always told him that, and I tell everybody that. If you have an in-flight emergency, and I've had several, don't worry about that damn airplane. It's why you got insurance, And my saying is this: if the airplane tries to kill you, try to kill it back. The heck with that damn thing. If you got to rip the wings off of it to be able to walk away from the wreck, then rip the wings off. Whatever you got to do, man.
So getting back to the, you've mentioned so many stories about power lines already. So when you do have a job, how do you guys analyze the threats? I mean, are you doing scouting runs in the plane? Do you do stuff from the ground? How do you guys, mitigate that?
Sometimes both. If I've got a field that is really complex to fly due to obstacles and power lines, I may go drive out there and look at it and then decide. And I've had fields where I've turned it down. I said, you know what, this field's just not meant for an airplane. You guys need to ground spray this. It's just too unsafe. There's too many things going on inside of that field. But typically we'll fly around the field at about 200 feet above the ground to try to find all the obstacles and find the power lines and where they're going. And, of course, as you get older, that becomes a bigger challenge because your vision isn't what it used to be, right? I mean, when I started, I had 2013 vision. I had eagle eyes. I could spot a power line from 5 miles away. Now I get the field, I just got to look for poles. So I could still see the poles pretty darn good.
Right.
But I still have 20/20. But anyway, that's what we'll do. And there's some, things that you really got to look for is transformers. Transformers is a clue that there's a line coming off there going somewhere, right? And you want to figure out where that thing's going. It might be going right in the middle of your field to a pump or something. Guy wires are a real big threat to us. Guide wires, it killed one of my friends. He hit a guide wire with the wingtip, and it just pulled him right into the power lines. And then he went across the street and right into a clump of great big fir trees, and that plane just disintegrated when it hit that. So we have actually changed the way we do things in my company, me and my son, after that accident. I said, there's nothing worth getting killed over trying to do a border pass and try to get that close to those poles. Let's just stay away from the guy wires. Let's do the border passes at power line height. The material will still get down in there, and we don't have to worry about guy hitting a guide wire with a wingtip. So that's the one change that we made.
You mentioned the weather. Do you have somebody that's constantly monitoring that? And besides wind, which is obvious, are there other weather factors that you really have to pay attention to? Does like rain ruin it?
There's some products you can put on in the rain. Dry fertilizer we can put on in the rain. Some of the fungicides in a light rain won't bother them. But wind is definitely our number one factor. And we have a smoker on the airplane so that we're constantly monitoring the wind and where that drift might be going. And so we can pop smoke while we're in the field working it. And we also look at all the local weather stations, to get an idea of what's coming.
Hold on. So a smoker
out there.
So a smoker drops like a smoke bomb, so then you can see the drift of it. Is that what you're saying?
Now we're, just like at an air show. Now we're pumping out smoke through the exhaust and putting out a big old smoke trail right in the middle of the field, and then we'll pull up and watch and see what that does. That can also give us an idea of whether we have an inversion or not. We don't want to spray in an inversion because then you don't know where that stuff could pick up and go and move. So we watch that pretty closely.
I gotcha.
Man, we also do some night flying. Something I started about.
Why not? Why not increase the difficulty?
Yeah. So I got into the NVG goggles, and we set the airplane up to fly at night, which it has to have special lighting. The cockpit has to get all redone so it doesn't interfere with the NVG goggles. And we've got the Generation 9 goggles, which are all black and white, which gives you better depth perception than the old green goggles.
No way. Wow.
And is the main advantage tonight just like better weather conditions, less wind typically, or?
It is. It actually has made us more productive because so many times it blows all day long, and then at night the wind goes down, it's dead calm, and we can spray all night. So that's been really nice. The other thing I like about it is it's cooler at night. The aircraft performs better. I'm not getting baked in the sun because the cockpit's just a big old greenhouse in these spray planes. So even though we got air conditioning in there, all it does is make it tolerable.
Right.
It still doesn't work very well. So, and then the other thing I like about flying at night is I don't get a lot of phone calls. So as the owner, all day long I get phone calls, but at night it's nice and quiet. I'm not being bothered, and I just get my work done. And you'll see some just incredible things at night through the NVG goggles. You'll see every shooting star. It's like a light show. And I've seen just the craziest things. Like one night, it was 2:30 in the morning. I see this column of light on the horizon. It just literally looks like somebody's got a spotlight shining straight up. And it was like the pre-dawn of the dawn is what it turned out to be. And pretty soon there was more of them. There's like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They just started getting more and more. And if I, lifted my head up and looked under the goggles, I could see nothing, no light. But through the goggles, I could see these shafts of light coming up. That was, like I say, the sunrise before the sunrise. It was just the most bizarre thing.
That's cool.
Wow.
The smallest amount of light makes an unbelievable difference in the goggles. So the first year I was flying them, I was coming back, and I was up at 500 feet trying to go back to the airstrip. And it was a very dark night. It was completely overcast, and there's not a lot of houses out there, so there's not a lot of light on the ground either. And I didn't know where I was at. I was like, man, where in the heck am I at? And And I thought, well, I wonder what would happen if I turned the landing lights on. Well, normally at 500 feet or 1,000 feet above the ground, you turn the landing lights on, there's nothing, right? They just shine out into oblivion and do absolutely nothing. I turn those things on, and it is freaking lit up the whole world out in front of me, like 5 miles out in front of me. I could see. I'm like, oh, now I know exactly where I'm at. And not only that, but the tiny bit of light that was traveling straight down was literally lighting up all the ground underneath the airplane from 500 feet up.
Wow.
Huh. So is that what you do when you land then at the strip if it's super dark out?
Yeah, well, I'll use the landing lights. And I'll use the landing lights to spray a field. But if you have any moon at all, I can actually work all night without ever turning the lights on.
Unbelievable. And these goggles are what, about $129 on Amazon? You pick them up normally?
Yeah. Yeah, no, they're actually about $14,000. And you have to be registered with the FBI to own a set.
Yeah. Wow. So how many airplanes and pilots are you running at your business?
Just two, me and my oldest son. And that's been one of the coolest things ever, to be able to fly with your own son and run a business together has just been such a privilege.
And will you guys usually work together, or will he be working a completely different location while you're doing, or how does that?
Well, we used to run two airplanes, and we couldn't really justify the expense of two airplanes, and it was one of the reasons I got into the MBGs, because my idea was that we could run just one airplane, and on a really busy year, I'll fly all night, and he'll fly all day. And there's been days where we go 48 hours without turning that airplane off.
No way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What about when you have to eat lunch or take a leak or something?
Well, we'll see. He'll jump in. I'll relieve him for a lunch break. I'll go fly for 2 hours, 3 hours, let him have lunch and a power nap, and then he'll jump back in it.
Wow. So you guys, it's such a limited season, so you got to grind it when you can, huh? And knock the work out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when the weather's good and there's window to get work done.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we'll do, 80% of our flying comes in a period of about 6 to 8 weeks.
Then the other job.
Hold on. I have one more question.
Okay.
So my favorite part about, obviously, anytime you see crop dusting aircraft, you make the pass and then you pull up and you do, it almost kind of looks like
Chandelle.
Kind of a chandelle. I don't know. Can you tell us a little bit about that maneuver? What do you call it?
It's like the old falling leaf turns or a chandelle. And it looks spectacular, but it's really, we don't pull more than about 1.2 to 1.5 Gs in that turn. We just let the plane fall back down through the turn to tighten it up. And, even though we might have it banked over clear to a 90 degree, we're nowhere close to stalling it or anything because we have no load on the wing.
You're unloaded, right?
Yeah.
And from the stick and rudder standpoint, obviously the precision on the pass is really important. Is that the biggest skill that you see for a crop dusting pilot, or from a stick and rudder standpoint, what do you think is the most important?
So the most important thing, it's obviously a dangerous job and there's a lot going on and things are happening really fast. So the learning curve that first couple of years as an ag pilot is huge. And I always tell guys, when you're in any kind of a job in commercial flying where you are the only pilot in that aircraft, who's your evaluator, right? You've got to do self-evaluation all day long, and you've got to be willing to be honest with yourself. If you have one of those personalities where you can't admit to yourself that you screwed up and you don't want to accept it, that's a problem, because you're the only self-evaluator in there. So you've got to evaluate your own skills. Hey, how am I doing today? Am I feeling good? Am I sharp? Am I thinking through things right? Am I doing my job right? Am I being safe? Am I too tired? Do I need to shut this thing down and go take a nap? There's nobody in there telling you to go do those things or to say, hey, man, you screwed up. You got way too close to that tree on that entry on that last pass. What are you going to do to correct that? So it's self-evaluation is really, really key in any commercial operation where you're a single pilot. And I've flown Flight of King Airs down here in California, and we're a two-man crew. And that's just a totally different environment. And I've had a Part 135 operation where I was giving float plane rides, which was my own business. And I think, in that setting and in the airline setting, you're constantly being evaluated. You have to do check rides. You have to perform, and there's somebody evaluating your skills and whether you're safe or not. We don't have that in crop dusting. You don't have that in banner towing. You don't have that in a lot of other areas of aviation. And so that self-evaluation thing is really important.
That's interesting. I hadn't even really thought about that much.
Do you have to get last question on the crop dusting stuff? To satisfy insurance, do you guys have to go back to a specific school or a simulator every year?
No, but there is state requirements for currency as far as a commercial applicator's license goes. And then our industry we do have once a year, we all get together and go through courses and classes to stay current, and the insurance companies like to see that. They offer a discount if you go through those courses.
Can I have one last question too? I know.
Last question.
We keep saying that. So is there a threat to your business and crop dusting as a whole with unmanned vehicles?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I think we're a long ways from that being a viable option for several reasons. Number one, it's, to compete with these large turbine aircraft that we're flying today, you'd have to have a pretty freaking large unmanned aircraft to be that productive. And that technology, I don't think, is there yet. And especially in terms of batteries, the batteries just don't last long enough to get through a whole day of spraying 3,000 acres, So we're a ways out on that. And then there's going to be the cost. I mean, a new spray plane today is $1.5 million. Well, what's an unmanned aircraft going to cost? And I can't imagine. There's very few farmers that buy their own spray plane. And so I can't see farmers buying their own unmanned aircraft to go spray their own fields. However, as crop dusters and this whole thing evolves, maybe we'll step out of the cockpit and we'll be the guys running the unmanned spray craft and still, selling that service to the farmers.
Yeah, you imagine, drones are cool at like camera work and stuff like that, but anytime you got a payload,
yeah, that's
seems like they're just,
tricky.
how are they going to carry that at this point?
Yeah. Yeah, and we're not even there with electric aircraft. They say the battery technology is still 15 years away to get enough storage for a 3-hour or 4-hour flight. And so it's coming.
Someday.
It's coming, but it's a way, it's just a ways off.
Well, Ken, sounds like you're pretty busy during that season. So where on earth do you find the time to do the aerial firefighting in there?
Well, towards the end of the spray season, we usually end in July. We've got a little bit of work to do in August, and I don't do fire full time. I'm just a relief driver for a company, and so I'll come in and relieve guys because they have mandatory relief schedules. And that's something I've only been doing for about 2 years is the fire gig. So,
and are you serving in a pilot capacity, or are you actually using your crop dusting aircraft, and do you guys use that same aircraft?
Yeah, they use the 802 air tractor, which is a spray plane and can also be a fire airplane. And it's a pretty large aircraft that holds 800 gallons. So it's bigger than the one that we spray with. And so I fly their aircraft. Our company's got 5.
Okay, so you're doing the pilot services on it. And
they call those seats. So there's all different levels of fire. Seats are the smallest fixed wing, and then they get into the big heavies, and then the helicopters. So the seats are good for getting in and out of the really tight spots that the heavies can't get to.
Right.
And the seats can also operate off of smaller airstrips.
And are you dropping retardant typically or water?
Yeah, typically it's retardant out of seats.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the...
So, and I did it in Idaho. Idaho's got a lot of fires this year. And so we were being dispatched into some of the nastiest terrain in the worst part of the day, right? You got sent out. It's 105 degrees outside, and I get dispatched out of Mountain Home and go 130 miles and drop a load on a fire up on the South Fork of the Salmon River. and you got to somehow climb with a full load up to 12,000 feet, you know, to get over all the mountains and to get to the fire. So it's
makes crop dusting sound easy.
It can be pretty challenging and dangerous, and then you poor visibility with the smoke, and the fire's making its own weather, and the wind's blowing, and it's they do everything they can to make it safe, but it is a challenge.
So what is more dangerous, fighting fires or crop dusting?
That's a very interesting question. They both have their challenges. I mean, it's I think you're in the danger zone a little less, obviously, in fire than crop dusting. Crop dusting, you're down in the field, you're in the danger zone all day long. On fire, you're straight and level flying and getting to the fire. However, when you get to the fire, that danger zone can be as challenging or more challenging than crop dusting,
right?
Depending on the fire and the terrain, especially up in those big mountains. You know, we're dealing with high density altitude all day long on fire, and winds, and you really need to have a lot of mountain flying experience to do that job.
It's listening to Ken talk about these two types of flying. You just can't have an off day. Like I've shown up and just haven't been, had an off day at work or whatever. And, it's just, you can't afford to have an off day in the kind of flying you're doing. Cause it's
not really
a split second of.
And if you are having an off day, you got to be smart enough to just pull the plug, and you got to have personal limitations and know when you've hit those and go, you know what, I just need to shut this thing down and get out of it for a while.
And I think that makes it
That's hard to do when you've got farmers going, man, I need my stuff sprayed, or or you're on a fire and it's raging, and they're like, man, we need to get this thing under control.
Yeah.
So
it's funny because like at the airlines, we can call in fatigued, and you might delay 180 people or whatever, but you have a narrow window of when you can do this work, and obviously you have to remain ultra productive. It's like there's a lot of pressure to make that decision when to pull the plug, but that's interesting way to look at some of the decision making.
With a two-man crew, you always got your buddy there, to fall back on. You're like, hey, I ain't feeling too good right now, and I need to take a break. Your controls. You don't have that option.
Sure. Or you take this leg or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you do a little two pilot flying in a King Air. Can you tell us, since your career isn't interesting enough?
Yeah, we have a very unique program down here. It's a sterilized fruit fly program, and it's run out of Los Alamitos Army Base. And years ago, they would let the fruit flies build up to a certain population, and then they would tell people down here in the LA Basin, hey, we're going to spray this neighborhood. You better have your kids inside, your dogs inside, your cats inside, your car inside, right? Because we're going to put some malathion out and spray right over the top of your house. Well, they didn't like that.
Did you used to do that work?
Reasons. Yeah, that didn't work too well down here. So they came up with this sterilized fruit fly program about 25 years ago. And the company I fly for, Dynamic Aviation, has been doing that contract for the most part through those 25 years. There's a couple of years they didn't do it. But they take these male fruit flies and they sterilize them. And then we drop those fruit flies from a King Air at varying altitudes, which a lot has to do with the airspaces around the LA Basin. And we drop those fruit flies, they breed with the females that are out there, and then, of course, nothing happens. So they'll control the population through that method, and it's very, very effective. However, that program has to be going constantly for it to be effective. They can't let the numbers grow too big. If they do, then the program doesn't work. So it's a 7-day-a-week operation. We have 4 King Airs. Typically 2 are flying, and then we have 2 backups. Sometimes 3 are flying. And there's 2 missions a day typically. Both aircraft will go out, drop flies in the morning, and then we'll go out again in the afternoon. And those flight missions might be from 2 hours long to 3.5 to 4 hours long, depending on the load and how far we're going. And it's a lot like crop dusting in the fact that we have the same GPS equipment you have in a spray plane, and we have these fields or these grids up in the air that we fly, and we work it just like a field. We spray back and forth across that, make our turnarounds, but instead of doing a pull-up turnaround, it's a flat turn. The lines are a mile apart, and then while we're on the line, we're dropping flies. And so it's a two-man crew because there's a lot going on between all the controlled airspaces that we're working inside of, as well as operating the fly machine, doing the flying, and doing all the paperwork. So we'll take turns flying. One guy will fly, the other guy will run the radios and the fly machine and do the paperwork. And then about halfway through, we'll swap. And we're carrying a lot of flies. When I first started the job, they would show up these boxes and they'd be like, okay, you got 55 pounds of flies in this box. Well, I didn't know what that meant. Well, 55 pounds. I finally asked, I go, well, how many flies are in a pound? 73,000. So 73,000 times 55 pounds, that's a lot of flies we're dropping on one mission. There might be 4 million, 8 million flies that we'll go out and drop in one mission. And it's really been a lot of fun and a unique job. We've got a lot of young pilots that come in that want to be airline pilots. And this is probably one of the best jobs for them in terms of building flight time, because they've made a ton of twin engine time on this job, and it's all turboprop time. Plus, we're working inside of one of the busiest, air controlled traffic areas in the whole country. So it's busy and it's challenging. It's very, very interesting. There's a lot of science behind it. They have fly traps, like 4 fly traps for every square mile in the LA basin area. And they go out and check these fly traps all the time. And the way they know whether it's a fly that we dropped or it's a native fruit fly is if the fly has a dye on it. There's this orange dye that they put on the little fly pupa, and when those things hatch, they absorb that dye. And so it's like a bright pink orange color. And if it's rained, it might have washed the dye off of them. So then they'll take the fly and stick it under a magnifying glass, and they'll squeeze the head of that fly with a pair of tweezers, and the dye will actually come out the head of the fly.
Wow.
And you'll know if that's one of ours that we've dropped, or a native fly. So that's how they try to watch the population and figure out what areas we need to fly and how many we should drop in that area, in that zone. So we've got these zones all over the whole basin area. And I think there's about 25 zones. They used to go down all the way down to San Diego and drop them along the Mexican border, but the program's become so successful that even Mexico has come out with their own sterilized fruit fly program, and so we don't have to go down there anymore.
So are you at 1,000 feet above the ground when you're dropping the flies, or?
So we'll drop flies right over the top of LAX at 5,500 feet. We'll drop flies right next to LAX on the north side of it. There's a region there that we drop in that's 1,000 feet. We drop right over downtown LA at 1,800 feet, just a couple hundred feet above the skyscrapers.
Wow! And what is the fly machine you said?
Yeah,
how do you get them out into the air?
So that's very interesting. So they hatch all these flies in a 80-degree environment with 90% humidity, and they're on a screen. There's these square screens, and there's a tray around the outside of the screen where they put all the larvae. And then when the flies hatch, they go into the middle of the tray, and there's food in the middle of the tray for them. And these things will be stacked up about 8 feet high. And they let them get healthy for about 3 days before they put them in the airplane. But then you've got the challenge, well, how do you get them out of these trays and they don't just fly away? So they figured out if they cool them down to 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, they go into a comatose state, and they actually look dead. They'll be longer back with their feet straight up in the air, and that way they can shake them out of these trays and put them in the fly box. And then the fly box goes into the airplane, and we have a cooler in the airplane. We have an air conditioning unit that keeps that fly box between 32 and 40 degrees. So that way we can auger the flies at a consistent rate, whatever rate they want for that region, out of that fly box. And so we set the box in the airplane. on top of these 3 augers, and then we pull the trap door out of the bottom of the fly box so that the flies will fall down into the auger and get augered out of 2 chutes that come out of the bottom of the airplane.
Unbelievable.
I mean, if you would have told me, like, with a straight face, yeah, there's a dude that flies around LA, drops frozen fruit flies out of a
Wait,
King
so
Air.
they
I'd be
fall
like,
out of
"What?"
the airplane comatose, and then do they just wake up while they're falling and then fly
They
away?
do. Yeah, they warm up,
You're
wake
kidding
up,
me. Come on, Ken.
start flying.
Okay, now, Ken,
Yeah,
tell us
serious.
about, have the fruit flies ever gotten loose in the
Yeah.
cabin?
Or the air conditioning stopping.
You know,
and
if you have a fly phobia, this job is not for you, because no matter how hard we try to plug every little hole and crack, there's always a few flies flying around the cockpit.
Oh, my God, that's got to be so... I
Wait,
hate
so-
fruit flies.
Let's back up for a minute. How do you sterilize a fruit fly?
Well, you know, so they put them under a microscope and they take these little rubber bands.
Really small rubber bands.
They actually give the larva a very light dose of radiation to sterilize them.
Oh,
Jeez, perfect.
same way you do with a line guy.
Yeah.
Just turn the radar
Yeah.
on, right?
There you go. Yeah, and you need to separate the females from the males, right? We don't want to be dropping
Yeah.
females.
Right.
So they take all these larvae, and they found out if they run all the larvae through a bathtub of like 80-degree water or something like that, I think it's the males that float and the females all sink, and that's how they filter and separate the males from the females. And they do all this in Hawaii because the fly is native to Hawaii. So if it gets loose over there, it's not a big deal. So they don't grow these flies here. They grow them in Hawaii, and they come into LAX once a day, and we got a crew that goes over there and picks them up.
My mind is blown.
Yeah, my head's exploded after this interview.
I think I have more questions than answers now. I don't know.
That's incredible.
Wow. So is there any time in the year when you're not doing an
Well, yeah, he flies
interesting-
for fun too. Let's
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about that, Ken.
Yeah.
What do you?
Yeah, I do find a little bit of time to fly for fun. I love flying in the backcountry of Idaho, and I've owned 19 different airplanes. My wife's like, you got to buy one more and make it an even 20 at some point. So
My wife's trying to keep me at an even 0.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very successful.
A lot of them have been experimentals. I like the experimental category, and as Max knows, I have a moose like he does, and I've thoroughly enjoyed that aircraft. Some of the most interesting airplanes I've owned, one was the Helio Courier, and I had that on amphib floats, and I was giving rides with it and doing some charter work with it. And I had a Part 135 for it. I was actually flying passengers out of Long Beach here over to Catalina Island and landing in the ocean. And that was very challenging work, to say the least.
Yeah.
But that airplane is really incredible aircraft. So it's probably the most stable aircraft I've ever flown with a full load in it in terms of landing and approach. And you just pick your spot, set it down wherever you wanted to. And as soon as you'd cut power, it would just settle and not float, not skip, not bounce. And you could hammer the brakes as hard as you wanted to, because Helio had put the landing gear up on the firewall on purpose so that even if you landed in a muddy field, you probably would not flip that aircraft over. You could hit the brakes as hard as you wanted. And,
Really? Wow.
Really, really an amazing airplane.
'Cause that airplane has the automatically extending and retracting leading edge slats, right?
It does, yeah. And you could do things in that airplane that would get you killed in a Cessna 180 or 185. Like you could pull it off the ground at 35 knots at a very steep angle of climb and roll it into a 45-degree bank turn, and it would just hold it and keep climbing.
Wow.
You tried that in a 180, you just fall out of the sky.
Yeah, you'll flow over on your back. Have you flown a Helio Stallion, the turbine?
I have not. There's only a couple of those still around. That's a very rare bird.
So when you fly in the backcountry, we've talked to a couple guys that have flown back there. What's your favorite strip to go in and out of?
I like Big Creek a lot. That's just really a beautiful setting. Johnson Creek, Moose Creek, of course. Sheer is really unique, beautiful, right along the edge of the river, and kind of a challenge to get into and get back out of. So that one's kind of fun. But one of the reasons I bought the Moose was because as great as the Helio Courier was, you know, it with the leading edge slats hanging out and all the flaps hanging out, it needed all 300 horsepower to perform well. And so when you got it at high density altitudes in the backcountry, it didn't do so good, especially on takeoff. You know, landing was great, but taking off with all that drag, I learned pretty quickly that you got to get those leading edge slats in before it really wanted to climb. And that scared me a couple of times. One time I had three of us in it and broke ground, no problem, at Johnson Creek, which is a great big airstrip, but it was, you know, 70 degrees outside and wasn't making full power, and it got off the ground good, but it wouldn't get out of ground effect, and it wouldn't climb. And we used up that whole runway. I thought we were going to hit the trees at the end. And I finally got the leading edge slats to suck in, and then it climbed out like a 180. But so that was a real learning lesson. It was like, okay, this airplane, and I did more research on it, and a lot of Helios have been wrecked on takeoff for that very reason. And so I learned real fast that you'd break ground and then get that nose down and try to get those leading edge slats in and get your airspeed and then climb. And then it was fine. But the thing I love about the Moose is it's a supercharged engine. And, you know, I get a lot of people that ask me, hey, man, I want to do the backcountry thing. I want to go fly in the backcountry. What kind of airplane should I get? And my answer is this. There's no right airplane, but get one with the highest thrust-to-weight ratio as you possibly can.
Exactly.
Because there's no substitute for horsepower when you're in trouble in the backcountry. And I'll tell you a story. You know, even under the most perfect of conditions in the backcountry of Idaho, up in the mountains, you get all this weird air moving around. And I've had a couple of takeoffs back there that just scared me to death. And it was under perfect conditions. And it was usually in an airplane that was a little bit marginal on power, like a 180. And so we all went into Big Creek one year after the big fire, and the lodge got burned down. And there was Idaho Pilot Association had a work party in there. And so we all helped with the cleanup. And there was a lot of airplanes that showed up for this night, including a beautiful Beaver. This guy had a Beaver out of Boise, Idaho, that he just restored. It was just gorgeous. And anyway, about 11 o'clock, and this is early spring, so it's not real hot. 11 o'clock, we're starting to get a little bit of a wind change, and that airstrip is uphill, so you'll land to the south, take off to the north. And the windsock was showing maybe a 2 to 3 mile an hour tailwind is all. And I didn't think nothing of it, neither did anybody else. And the first guy to take off was a guy by himself in a Cessna 170. And he took off, and we watched him because we were number 2 in my buddy's Cessna 180. And he struggled, but we didn't know why. We just thought, well, it's a Cessna 170, you know. And so now it was our turn, and it was just me and my friend in his 180. We didn't have camping gear or anything. And we barrel off down the hill. We broke ground good, but we couldn't climb. Could not climb, couldn't get out of the burble. There was some bad air. It was just mixing up going down that hill. And that thing would not climb. And my buddy had his hands full, man. And finally he just gave up on climbing and just went for airspeed, which I always recommend. Airspeed over altitude any day of the week, man. And if you got airspeed, you got options. So he just went for airspeed, stayed in ground effect, and to make sure we had enough momentum and airspeed to clear the trees at the end of the runway, and pulled up over those. And then once we got going, we climbed out of there. We were getting bounced around a little bit. And it's a long climb out of Big Creek. And so we're doing a circling climb to get up and over the ridge line. And I look down, and here comes that Beaver down there. And I see him, and he's climbing. And I called him on the radio, and I said, hey, man, because he was number 3 to take off. I said, hey, man, how was that takeoff for you? And he was just him and his wife and the Beaver. And he goes, holy cow, man. He goes, my wife was trying to tell me how to fly. So, you know, it's just challenging flying the backcountry, and I absolutely don't recommend it unless you get some training. And even with training, it can be challenging. You want to have the right airplane. So
start early. Don't fly too late, right? You got to kind of stack the deck in your favor, right?
Yeah,
With as much,
you want to stack the deck in your favor for sure.
Because there's so much unknown.
Overconfident.
That's why
always err on the side of caution when you're back there.
Yeah, but that's, you know, one of my intentions of building this airplane is to go fly in the backcountry, and I'm certainly not going to do it without training and some restraint on where I go for a long time. But when I built the plane, I did put every ounce of power. I put that big carbon fiber prop that you have too, right? On there. So you have the best climb performance. I put VGs on, I put higher compression pistons. I got the 400 horsepower version. I'm trying to have everything I can.
Supercharged, which
built
makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And I built it, as light as I can. I'm not quite as light as you, but I'm close. Like,
did you put VGs on both wings? Yeah.
And the tail, in the vertical and the horizontal.
That's right.
Well, Ken, before we let you go, we love to wrap up every interview with a story. I'm sure you're not going to have to think too hard to think of a good story. I know you've already told us about 10 stories, but any good final stories you have for us before we let you go?
Well, one of the most comical things that ever happened to me in crop dusting, and if it can happen in a spray plane, it's happened. You just name it. There's been guys that have taken off the load hose still hooked to the airplane and drug the pump all the way down the runway into the air. But I still have my little Cessna, and it was back before GPS, and so we're dropping flags. And I had just fired my loader because it was the end of the season. We just didn't have much work. And so, we're all creatures of habit. And my airplane had a flagger on the right wing, and you could load the flagger with a speed loader and put a full rack of flags in pretty quickly. But without my regular loader helping me, I'm doing everything right. I've got a load getting pumped into the airplane. It needs gas, so I'm fueling it. And my flagger needs flags, and my windshield needs to be washed. And so I'm doing all these things at the same time, which is never a good idea. So I jammed a whole rack of flags in to the flagger, and I flipped the lid shut, but I didn't latch it. I was going to come back and do that. And, of course, with everything else going on, I forgot and never did go back and latch the lid on the flagger. So I get out to the field, and I make my first pass, and it's very hilly where we fly. So it's a lot of positive, negative G's going over and across the hills. So I get to the first big hill, and I push negative to go over the top of it, and the flagger lid flies open, and half of that rack of flags just goes poof out of the airplane. Out of the flagger box, dumps them all on the ground. So now I'm just pissed off at myself that I forgot to latch that lid, and I've got to go back to the airport to fix it. And I'm talking to myself all the way back to the airport, which is a 12-mile ferry, and I catch this flash out of the corner of my eye, and I look, and the half a rack of flags that was left in there are being sucked out one at a time, and they're just going poof, 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 poof. And I look back, and as far as you can see, there's flags floating to the ground across the highway, across houses. Left a breadcrumb trail. By the time I got to the airport, the whole rack was empty and gone. So, and I just started laughing. What else can you do, right?
Yeah, at that point. That's pretty funny.
Follow me for a good time. Oh, man. Well, this has been really interesting, Ken, to hear a little bit about maybe some of the lesser known corners of aviation. If we have a lot of younger pilots that listen to the show, instructors and guys that are getting their licenses, and gals, if they wanted to get more information about crop dusting, do you guys have a trade association? What would you recommend as like the first step that
go on our website, the NAAA.com. That's the National Aerial Application Association. And there's actually information on that website for people looking to get into becoming a crop duster, or aerial applicator is the politically now correct term.
Aerial flag dispenser.
Yeah.
Ken, have you ever considered starting a YouTube channel?
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe you should be the one with the podcast.
A lot of my friends have told me I need to write a book with all my flying stories.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah, no kidding.
We've only touched on a few of them here. I've got 17,000 hours flight time. And, I've had 7 in-flight emergencies and cover everything short of being on fire. So it's been an interesting run for sure.
Okay. Well, I guess that means we should save Ken's phone number for later.
I got it. Don't worry.
Ken, you want to talk about how people could find your business if they're interested in getting in touch with you?
Well, we're on Facebook, Ranch Aero Incorporated.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, Ken. Time to go put our heads back together.
Okay. I'm going to go kill some fruit flies in my kitchen.
Man, we appreciate Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
Let it do what it do. Right rudder. You know how it is out here, Mike. Boom.
It's funny, you know how we always end every episode with a good story. We got so many from him. It was like,
I don't even know why. We should just shut it off right at the end of that interview and be done.
Man. So I kind of want listener feedback to be like, when we got to call him again, I feel like, for more stories, and let us know.
And the thing, it's funny, I've been texting him about all these airports in the backcountry of Idaho that he goes to. You guys done it all.
Yeah.
It's
it was sad. I just actually flew over the Sawtooth Mountains where everyone goes, and there's smoke everywhere. And we've heard that the flying's been really reduced up there this year.
I think it's funny because we're so enamored with what he does and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was talking to him off the air, he's like, "Yeah, man, I'd really like to have a job like you're doing right now. You know, flying a private jet." And I'm like, "What?"
Did you tell him, there's no sim instructors?
Fruit flies out of a King Air. What? You don't want to do what I do. This is boring.
Argue about ice and fuel at
Yeah.
FBO. We only leave the engines running for like 3 hours maximum.
Yeah. Not 2 days like you can.
Oh, man. Well, that's going to do it for episode 61. Thanks to everyone who's written reviews, subscribed, made donations. We really appreciate the support. We'll be back in a couple weeks with another episode. But until then, remember,
flexibility.
It's the key to air power.
And to loading live fruit flies into a King Air.
Is it flexibility that's important, or like
most of the temperature? It sounds
I would say the temperature, and maybe like one of those like the safari hats with the mesh.
I don't think they sting.
I don't know.
All right, that's enough.
See you guys.
All right.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.